From ancient civilizations to the lost city of Z, we've got you covered at Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents, to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you not live from the 10x10x10 tangent cube of science, nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed, high atop the Edwards Plateau. And I think we have a great show for you guys today. Got a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. Got some construction experts in here. But first, before we do that, I need to introduce the one and only Longhead, Mr. Brett England from deep beneath his secret space station, deep in secret outer space. How you doing, buddy? What's going on? You ready for this show?
Dude, I'm very excited for this show. The stash already has me doing math before we even started, so I'm amped.
I would like to see your space burrowing machine. I want to know how you excavate those bunkers.
Yeah, how do you excavate those underground space bunkers?
Underground space bunkers, it involves lots of tiny wormholes.
All right, to get things started, we start with...
That's not right. I forgot to load up the keyboard. Space weather news!
Space weather news!
Is that the analog space weather?
Solar minimum conditions are in effect. The sun has been without spots for 7 consecutive days, a sign that solar minimum is underway. Many people think that solar minimum is uninteresting. Not so. This phase of the solar cycle brings extra cosmic rays, long-lasting holes in the sun's atmosphere, and strangely pink auroras. Speaking of pink auroras, last night, February 6th, a minor crack opened in Earth's magnetic field. Solar wind poured in to fuel an outburst of green and pink auroras. Oliver Wright of Lights Over Lapland was guiding a group of tourists through Abisko National Park in Sweden when he photographed the display. The forecast did not call for geomagnetic storms, so this came as a bit of a surprise, said Wright. The pink band was very strong. Most auroras are green, a verdant glow caused by energetic particles from space hitting oxygen atoms 100 kilometers to 300 kilometers above Earth's surface. Pink appears when the energetic particles descend lower than usual, striking nitrogen at the 100-kilometer level and below. For reasons that are not fully understood, pink auroras are sighted relatively often during solar minimums. That is from spaceweather.com, which is where we get all our space weather news.
Also, the Earth's magnetic pole is still increasing in speed. I saw another story about that.
Oh, yeah.
It's hauling ass towards Siberia as we speak. Increasing in speed.
And probably going to set off...
Only the North Pole.
Right, that's right. The South Pole is staying in the same place.
Winter is coming.
All right. Special guest today, we have a man with 18 years experience, owner and managing small businesses, including 12 years Texas Hill Country Rural Property Development and Wildlife Management, 4 years industrial and utility construction, oil and gas pipeline industry, 13 years commercial steel construction, structural and reinforcing, 19 years construction experience and supervision and management positions, 7 years quality assurance with a secret security clearance granted by the U.S. government. And he is in the Society of Non-Destructive Testing Level 2 Magnetic Particle Testing Technician. This is the Stash, the Snake Father, the Paterfamilias. It is our dad. He has a mustache that is older than me, and it has seen a lot of shit, and that is what we're going to talk about today, is his construction experience. A lot of the stuff that we talk about on Brothers of the Serpent is about how when we look at these ancient structures, we're just like, there's no effing way they did that the way they say they did it. And the reason we can say that with confidence is because of our dad and all of his construction experience.
Welcome to the Tangent Cube.
That's right.
Thank you, guys. It's a real honor to be here. I've followed the Impossible stories and pictures with very great interest, and can't wait to talk about some of the stuff I've seen. And you can get my book. It's called Another Episode in As the Boom Falls. And there's a special chapter by the Pyramid Builders, which I was around for, I'm not old, called Hell, That Ain't Going Nowhere.
right. That ain't going nowhere. And they were right that time.
They were.
I have to tell this story real quick. We went to the Steely Dan concert in Austin and went to buy T-shirts.
Oh, yeah.
After the show with Dad, and he like gets the T-shirts and he's paying with the card and he swipes the card on they have the big iPad thing. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
You pay with or whatever.
Right.
He's like, can you sign your name? And it's got the blank line and he's like, what? With my finger? He's like, yeah. He's like, man, I haven't done this since I was painting on cave walls 30,000 years ago.
I haven't signed anything with my fingers since I was painting in cave walls. I'm that old.
She looked to be about 16, and when I said that, she took a step backwards. What is this guy?
I think this guy's serious.
Yep.
All right, so one of the most interesting construction projects you were involved in was the Galveston Bay Bridge project.
Yes.
By the way, people, we have a ton of pictures for this. He has given me a whole stack of like analog photos, like, old school ones, which I will be scanning to put into the show notes. And then we have a whole bunch of digital ones that he took also of some of the more recent projects. But the one I want to talk about first is the Galveston Bay Bridge, and that is because of, number one, the weight of the largest thing you guys moved, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So basically explain the project overall.
All right. In 2001, the Coast Guard condemned the opening in the Intercoastal Causeway where the Galveston Railroad Bridge had a bascule bridge, which just means it opens from one side and raises up the railroad track so petrochemical barge traffic could get through there and shrimpers. Well, anytime you have a storm in the Gulf of Mexico, it became a problem as a serious bottleneck, as this opening was only 90 feet wide.
Oh, yeah.
So the Coast Guard said, that's totally unacceptable. We gotta make it wider. Well, that involved keeping the railroad bridge traffic going while a new bridge and towers that they were making a double lift span. In other words, the whole bridge would rise up on two towers, one on each side of the Intercoastal Causeway, with massive counterweights, and pick the whole bridge up and make it 300 feet wide. So my job on the project was a welding inspector for the Galveston water lines, which also passed down this railroad right-of-way, and they were going to have to be cut and reworked. I won't even go into that ridiculous project. But I had a bird's eye view of the structural steel towers being built on each side of the causeway, and then they built the bridge. This was the most interesting thing, is they constructed the structural steel bridge with the tracks and all the electronics on Galveston Island, and then when they had it completed, they loaded it onto a barge 382 feet long, and the barge was less than 90 feet wide because it had to go through that causeway. So you've got all this bridge hanging over both sides of the barge. It was an incredible sight. And then from the island, they trucked this thing onto the barge and then floated it out to the two towers at the opening in the causeway, and hooked it up to the counterweights and raised it up, all within 24 hours. Now, the bridge took months to put together, and the towers took months to put together. But from the time they had the towers finished and the counterweights ready and all the rigging and the bridge on the barge, they floated that bridge out there one morning. They had it hooked up to the towers and counterweights that day and raised it up that evening. Within 24 hours, barge traffic was going through there, and the train they could let it down and let the train go across it as well.
Wow.
So the amazing thing was these field engineers, we're I say this all the time, we are really badass, we can do anything. And this one was one of those projects where I just watched as they measured the distance between the two towers constantly, and then ran back over to the island and measured the length of the bridge as it was being constructed. Now, these guys are having heart attacks. One of them literally had 2 heart attacks on the job, making sure that these distances, when that bridge was brought out there, fit exactly right between those 2 towers. Had to fit perfect.
That it would just hook into both sides.
Hook into both sides, and the tracks needed.
Hey, slide your side of the island over a little bit, will ya?
Yeah. Hook that come along to the island. Pull it over here a little bit. So anyway, I witnessed this whole thing, and I was actually employed by the Bridge Engineers, a company out of Pittsburgh. They designed the whole bridge system, and it was their project from top to bottom. And I worked for them as the waterline welding inspector, but because a lot of that time was downtime, I hung out with the bridge engineers and got lots of good pictures and info on what was going on a daily basis. So yes.
So the bridge span itself, and we've got pictures. I'm posting these up in the chat so that the watcher can see them, and we will also put them in the show notes. The stash will provide us a wealth of photographs. The bridge span itself, which is what we're talking about, is basically blue. It's steel painted blue, and it's like a standard bridge truss. Think of it as like it's kind of a bow-shaped bridge truss, and it's a railroad bridge, okay? And it's got all the rails, all the electronics, all the other stuff on it already. It's completely prefabbed basically somewhere else, and then they had to. You guys had to roll it. Yeah. They had these special machines, but how many axles does that thing have?
Oh my gosh, you couldn't count them.
1, 2, 3,
there were
4, 5,
there were 2 trucks, and they centered them, side by side under that whole bridge. When they constructed the bridge, it was built.
I think it's 18 axles. So
and
there's 2 on either side, right? There's 1 on each side. So there's 18 axles per machine, and they're specifically how fast do they go? 2 feet per hour.
Well, it's a guy walking alongside it with a joystick box.
Right, and each individual wheel could turn.
And when he turns them, all 18 axles turn.
Wow.
So when they brought it down to the barge, they had the barge full of water.
Right, so that it would sit low.
It was sitting down exactly the same height as the dock. Well, when that truck ran, at first you could, with 18 axles, most of the axles were not under the bridge. They were either in front of it or behind it. They started those 2 trucks up on the barge. Well, the barge immediately starts going down as it feels the weight. Now they have to have these huge 6-inch pumps pumping the water out of the bilges so that the barge stays at the same height as the bridge weight gets on the barge. So it's just a tricky operation.
How were they suspending it out over the barge, or did they?
The barge was pulled into a bay, and it was rolling it out.
Oh,
yeah. I've got pictures but I'm looking for them. I don't have it yet. But we're rolling it on the barge.
So the bridge itself was 382 feet long. And of course, it's all structural steel beams, and it weighed 2,936,000 pounds, which I did do some math today. I divided that by 2,000. I came up with 1,468 tons, which is not quite the size of the rock at Baalbek.
Yeah.
Still,
it's about 200 tons less
oh my God.
than one of the blocks at Baalbek, the ones that are underneath the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, which are 1650.
We moved this thing. Now, I'm not going to say we picked it up, but I watched these guys move this bridge from point A to point B and stick it on a barge, and then have the barge have all this bridge hanging over the edge and pushed out to sea in the middle of the bay, and then floated. It took probably an hour and a half for the barge, the tugs, to push that barge over to where it fit in. It wasn't right next to it. It was quite a ways away from it. where the bridge actually had to fit in between the two towers.
And can you imagine if there was like a small tsunami that came in right at that moment? With that bridge hanging off of either side of that barge?
Well, actually, the funny thing was, it was dead calm and foggy that morning. The day they loaded that bridge that I was standing out there, it was blowing a hurricane and cold. And actually, when the trucks went over...
There's the picture of the pumps.
From the...
Blowing the ballast out as it's rolling onto the barge from the deck.
So when the trucks actually got to the edge of the dock, the bulkhead, and started out onto the barge, the bulkhead broke under the weight of that bridge. I mean, it was, so who builds a bulkhead that can handle 1,468 tons on a point load right there at that edge?
At the edge.
Yeah.
I mean, what retaining wall?
Right.
Well, you'd have to build the retaining wall at a 1,400-ton blocks.
Yeah.
Stacked on top.
Which they would have had to extend back into Galveston Island. How far?
Yeah.
You just had to dig all that up and just start way back here.
Right.
So the place where the rolling machinery went, you guys put interlocking plates?
Yes.
What were they made of? Like steel or some sort? What were they made of? Like
They
Kevlar?
looked like some sort of
Woven?
some fiber. I have no idea what they were.
Okay.
They were very strange looking plates.
Yeah.
I did not ask at the time. Everybody was just like,
Yeah, everybody was. Freaking
pinching a hole in the seat everywhere they...
So there are pictures you've got of the plates where they've set them up, and then after the thing went rolling over, the plates have all been like buckled and shifted over and everything, and separated from each other just from these things trying to carry that thing across there.
Yes. But there again, it's just two guys with joysticks.
Yeah.
And they just walked that thing right up onto that barge. It was truly an amazing sight, but the weather that day was horrendous, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, if tomorrow's like that, when they try to push that thing out there, we got troubles.
Yeah.
Because most of it's 382 feet long.
Right.
And the barge is less than 90 feet wide.
So it's going to be rocking like crazy, yeah.
Well, the next morning, I got a picture of that thing coming out of a fog bank in dead, flat water.
Yeah.
And it just appeared.
The weather guy went home and slept well that night. He'd been stressing
just some of the construction that went on these two towers, and the way they had to put them up. The actual works that pick up that bridge are like, there's two big reels at the top, and they have cables on them. There's 32 cables on each reel, so there's 32 grooves on each of these gigantic reels, and the cable is 2 1/4 inches. And it goes down and hooks to the bridge, and the other end comes over the reel and hooks to the counterweight on each end at each tower. Wow. And the counterweights were steel boxes that they filled with concrete. And when they finally got the bridge out there and they started to try to see how easily it went up and down in the vertical lift span, they opened up those counterweight boxes and they started throwing lead in there.
Yeah, they didn't build them half the size of the ballback block. That was the problem. They needed 2 of them, half the size each of the ballback block.
Break one of those ballback blocks in half and hang them on either side.
But to get that balance just perfectly, so they have sensors.
They left
telling
extra
them,
space in.
You can't pick up this side of the bridge.
More than, yeah.
It has to go up perfectly, up all the way. So there were guys up there just throwing strings of lead weights down on top of the concrete in those boxes for probably days until they got that balance just right, where that bridge just went up and down just as smooth as anything.
Wow.
So it was quite a project.
So what's interesting is at the end of the project, you end up with a piece of machinery that can regularly and with relatively no problem pick up a 1,400-ton thing.
Correct.
Up and down, up and down, up and down, right?
Yes, because normal.
Well, you're picking up a 1,400 thing
By putting down
a 1,400 ton thing.
Right, exactly.
Right.
But the point is that like people say we couldn't do it. Okay, so here's a thing where once they got everything set up, it regularly picks up and puts down something
15
that's almost
times a day.
right.
On average, there's 15 trains. So the bridge is normally in the up position because there's more barge traffic
Than there are
going
trains.
through there than there are Burlington Northern trains. So the bridge stays up. And when a train comes, the bridge operator has to stop all barge traffic, and there's traffic going both ways through there, so east and westbound, they call it. And then he lets that bridge down, the train goes across, and then the bridge operator raises it back up, and each boat captain talks to the bridge on a certain frequency and says, Exxon Valdez westbound, and the bridge operator says, okay, you're first in line after so-and-so comes through the other way, eastbound. So he runs all the traffic, the bridge operator. So the bridge stays up, but it generally comes down for a train roughly 15 times a day. And it's been doing that since I left the job in 2012.
Yeah.
So every day. So we have to build them where they can withstand salt air, all kinds of harsh environments, storms in the Gulf. They have to be able to stay there. So after Hurricane Harvey, I contacted some of the guys in Houston that I worked with and asked if our bridge was still there. And they said, our bridge is still there.
That's badass.
So, but the amount of work and manpower and everything it took to do this, like for one thing, the flat ground, right? To roll that thing across, to get it on the barge. I was looking at the area and it's like perfectly flat, and it's
Yes.
like it's graded and
Yes.
it's some kind of
Yes.
gravel
Yes.
aggregate.
Right. But those things pushed it all over the place. It was
Right.
totally torn up when they got done moving that bridge. So yes, it was a great project to be on, great part, to be a part of it. And I got a really awesome bridge tour when it was all over. When my part of the water line was finished, they were still working on a few odds and ends on the bridge. And my bosses, which are your age, took me on a tour of that, and we climbed up one tower, walked to talk across the top of the span, and while we were on the span, we hear the bridge operator saying, because you have to, if you're on the bridge, you have to have a radio where you hear that bridge operator. They had a Burlington Northern train coming from the island to the mainland while we were on top of that span, and he lowered it down with us up on there. And that train went right between my legs. It was awesome.
How was it smooth, like the operation?
Oh my gosh, that thing shook like a...
No, when the train came through.
When the train...
No.
Oh yeah,
The raising
the
and lowering
bridge.
was-
Oh man, it operated silky smooth, but when that train came across there...
Yeah. Nothing like
Whoa.
having a river of metal going underneath you.
Yes.
Yes. Right between your legs.
Yeah.
River of metal.
Yeah, that was an amazing show. So yeah, I got the $5 million tour that day.
Yeah.
I'm telling you.
That's cool. So the counterweights, like you said, they were big, huge steel boxes that were empty,
Yes.
and they probably still weighed a shitload even though they
Oh
were
yeah.
empty.
Yes, I'm sure they.
And then once they got the bridge span out there in its lower position, they hooked everything up with the reels and everything like that, and then started filling them with concrete.
No, they had them full of concrete before the bridge got out.
Oh, okay,
They
okay.
didn't know, they kept them a little bit light.
Really full, yeah.
Yeah, but they had it. I guess their structural steel engineer added up the weight of that bridge.
They wanted to
pretty
leave
close
room
'cause-
for tuning, probably.
Yeah.
Well, what I'm
Yes.
asking is, were they all the way at the top then?
Yes.
Okay,
they were
that's what
all
I
the way
meant,
at
yeah.
the top with a rigid hook.
So they. That's right.
Two
That's right.
big rigid hooks holding them at the top, so that when they floated the bridge in there, now it's at railroad
They
track
can get the
height.
hooks off, and then they.
Then when they hooked the bridge to it, then they had to get those hooks off the counterweights and then let
Let them
the
pick
machinery
the bridge up.
pick
Yeah.
it up and down. So
Okay.
all the machinery had to be running, all the basically what the bridge was quick disconnects with all the cables.
Yeah.
382 feet of cables with millions of twist lock electrical couplings at each end of that bridge. You can see them in some of the pictures where they were loading it on a barge. If you scroll through my pictures there, you'll see where I was actually standing on the bulkhead where that, and you can see, you can see that all the electrical cables hanging down. There were quite a myriad of controls and alarms and sensors, as you can imagine. Not just some up and down thing like you would get with your Lionels.
Right. I'll find that picture, or you can find it. So it's fascinating that this thing on a regular basis basically picks up and puts down something that is the size and weight. Well, it's a lot bigger than a ballback block. It's much, much larger. But the weight, basically. But the point is that there were years of work that went into this, and all it does is pick it up and put it down in that one spot.
Right. The actual picking it up and moving it across land was like a serious preparation.
Right.
You had to have massive machines.
Exactly.
And then, like you said, the plates that they put down to sort of stabilize the ground, when they're moving it across there, like after the axle, after the machines drove over it, that's where all shifted and screwed up. And
Yeah.
so this is what we were talking about before in terms of like, okay, yes, we can build rigging around this ball bearing block that would lift it up and down. We could do that.
Yeah.
To pick the block up and move it across the ground, you'd have to have the ground fairly level, and then you'd have to reinforce the ground so that your tires on 18 axles don't sink into the ground. And you put those plates down, but there's no sign of that type of activity in the ball bearing. The quarries,
correct,
between the quarry and the site where they were stacking them.
So what I've seen in my years is Newton's first law. That thing is at rest. It doesn't want to move. It wants to stay at rest.
Yeah.
Once you get it in motion, it wants to stay in motion.
Yeah.
Well, that ball bearing rock, they got it moving. And then they stopped after 1,600 tons. You get it moving and then you stop.
Yeah. Perfectly, right. They stopped it right.
I'm totally baffled by
perfect
that
alignment.
Because when a crane picks up a load or anything picks up a load, that first initial, the power that it takes to initially break that thing away from rest is where stuff goes pretty wrong.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And by the time it goes wrong, you've already got it moving, and it's bad news.
Right. Yeah. Two things happen. The cable breaks, and the thing slams back down on the ground. The crane rocks backwards and flips over backward. I mean, the whiplash from all that, and the rigging comes right into the cab, and the headache ball takes out the operator. It's over.
Yeah.
Just from so they go to pick it up, and the back of the crane gets what we call gets light. So if you picture a track machine, and the tracks are perpendicular to the load, so you have one track and the load right away from it, and the back track, and they go to pick up that load, and when they start the force it takes to get that load started up off the ground, the back track comes up in the air. We call that getting light.
Yeah.
Where you can see daylight. And
around the entire track.
Sags. And you might even get a couple inches of dirt under that back track, but then once that load starts to come up, the crane settles down. If it's a good operator, he can feel it, and then the crane settles down. Now that the load is moving, he can just bring it up nice and smooth and then go from there.
Yeah.
That's like the ridiculously crazy, dangerous part of picking stuff up, is getting it from rest.
And then of course there's you guys have all seen cranes working, so you have to realize, like, basic physics, the longer the boom and the farther down it is, the less weight you can pick up, because both of the boom stress and then of course the leverage that the boom causes on the crane itself. So we'll go into more of that and some more of the other projects you've had where you've seen some disasters happen. We're going to talk about that after we take this break. We'll be right back.
And we're back. Brothers of the Serpent podcast, or Sons of the Stash podcast, especial. Here in the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science. And I wanted to ask you about crane operators. Didn't you? I seem to remember you telling me that they're all nuts. They're all crazy. Is that right? Do I have that right?
I always roomed with my crane operator. He held your job and your safety in his hands with those controls. So any project I went on, didn't matter who my crane operator was, he and I got a room together. It didn't matter if he smoked 100 cigarettes a day and brought peach brandy to the job and was weaving around. He was, my experience was every one of them were really great. Some of the trainees that they put on the smaller boom trucks, we nicknamed them pretty quick. One we called Whippoorwill, because if the boom wasn't whipping, it will.
I just seen her. Maybe I got this wrong, but you kind of have to be a little bit crazy. I don't mean necessarily that they are operating badly, but they're just.
I don't know.
Serious risk takers? I don't know.
They were mostly very calm guys. You can't sit in that chair and be a bundle of nerves. These guys were very confident.
And that's crazy.
Yes, I guess in that aspect. But if you
that giant weight is swinging towards you, and they're just like,
and,
totally insane.
And they would run my jobs from the cab of that crane and just tell me, don't do that, or do this, or don't do that. And generally, I just paid attention to them. My job was to get the building up safely, and knowing that guy had been sitting in that chair of that particular crane for I don't know how long. I just put my confidence in him. Yes, I had my share of disastrous operators more than once, and those things weren't good. But generally, I have nothing but good things to say about every crane operator I ever worked with.
Maybe it was welders who told me that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. Now that's what it was.
Yeah.
So, real quick, going back to the lifting of that bridge before we move on to these other things. You said there were the reels with 32 on each, so 64 2-inch cables. 2
1/4-inch cables on each end.
Okay. 64 2 1/4-inch steel, probably high tensile steel cables.
Fiber core. I don't know what that meant, but I saw them. I actually have a picture of them pushing. Well, I have pictures of the reels themselves and how they set them up on top of the towers. And then I have a picture of the barge bringing spools and spools and spools of cable out there that they had to string over those reels and hook to the counterweights at one end. And
that must have been a nightmare job. I would have hated it. Because that high tensile stuff doesn't want to be straight. Yeah, it wants to be in a curve.
It was rolled up.
It wants to be in the spool.
Right. So, so when you're talking about a crane and cable, that lever that Brett was talking about earlier is what's called a hydraulic telescoping rig. So you don't really have, the only cable you have is for the load cable, the live load line. The rest of it is hydraulic cylinders that scope out the boom that way. On a conventional crane, you have boom cable that rolls up on a drum, as well as the winch cable for the load.
Right, because
So you
that's
got-
lifting the boom up
Well,
or down.
that cable is specific to the way that drum hooks up. They call it right regular lay or left regular lay, so that when the cable is spooled onto that drum, it wants to go that way. It's not trying, like sometimes
Oh, I
your
see,
fishing
yeah.
reel will develop twists in the line.
Mm-hmm.
This line has a twist in it already, so that if the starting point's on this side of the spool and then the crane's reeling it up, then that's the way the cable wants to lay
Right.
every time a wrap is made. So they're actually twisted just for that lay.
That's great.
I don't know how. So now when you got a vertical lift span like this, where there's no
Yeah, it's
you
just
know,
rolling over that one
Right.
spool, and it's being straightened out.
right, I don't know how that cable is actually constructed, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, that's
So yeah, 64 2 1/4 inch cables on each end. So yes, I have pictures of all that too, for sure. But the other weird thing about that bridge project was everything had to have a tagline on it, which to me seemed utterly ridiculous. You got this massive.
What's a
just take-
what's a tagline?
Okay, so anything you pick up with a crane these days has to have a tagline on it, so that a guy on the ground holds this rope as the crane operator picks it up and starts to swing around and raise it higher and higher, and there's a tagline that the guy on the ground holds on to until to control the load until it gets to a height where the tagline's is too short.
Okay.
So now you got guys on top of the tower that are trying to guide in the
Oh yeah.
counterweight box that has to go down inside that tower. And there's a tagline on this gigantic steel box. And I'm like,
Who's gonna move that?
you can't.
That's kind of what I was going to get to
Yes,
about the
taglines.
cables, because we talked about this ridiculous idea that they move these Baalbek blocks by putting hempen rope around them and dragging them or pull.
Yeah. Yeah. So the
And
watcher.
You're talking about we got this bridge, but it takes 64 2 1/4 inch diameter cables
To pick up
To pick
half
it.
of it.
Yeah.
No, 64 total, 32 on each side.
No.
64
Oh.
per. What is it?
There was 32 cables on each spool. You said, I thought.
Yeah, there's two spools,
Two spools
on each
per
end.
tower.
Oh, there's 2 spools.
So
per
there's
tower.
128 cables total.
I may be wrong. Maybe it's 16 and 16, and then 16 and 16 at the other end.
Okay,
That's-
it matters.
that's-
64. Yeah.
Yeah,
It
so you
doesn't
got-
matter.
It doesn't
so-
matter. It's
So
cable. It's not
32
rope.
cables got to pick up half of that
Right.
bridge. They're not really doing anything.
And, like,
They're
you
just
can imagine-
static
Yeah.
because the counterweight's actually doing the work. It's just acting like a.
Right.
Yeah.
We need a calculator that will calculate hempen rope to cable.
Yeah.
So it's like we have a 2 1/4 inch cable. How many hempen ropes does that take?
Yeah.
So it's like, I mean, if you lay them side by side, that's 12 feet of cable.
Yeah. Yeah. Width. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just laying the cable side by side. So it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah, so the watcher asks, how many slaves with grease wood and logs and ropes would it have taken to move that bridge?
I'll tell you, sometimes I felt like a grease slave on that job. I had every kind of mess put on me I could get on me on that job. I was pretty much the dirtiest guy next to the slowest Mexican laborer on that job. I was all over it, and I got stuff all over me.
Yeah. Well, you were working in the cofferdams too, which I do want to talk to you. I know you said that that's not, but we're also interested in like the boring, the drilling,
Oh, okay.
because of like there are ancient civilizations that made enormous amounts of tunnel deep underground. So the drilling project is also fascinating
Yes.
that you were involved in with this project. Now, of course, it was in the water, so you had to have cofferdams and
Right, which worked about as good as you
expect.
put a paper cup down in the sink full of water and then punch a hole in the side of it and expect
Right.
the water to stay out. That's about how well they work. But yes, you were talking not too long ago about how straight those, whatever the tunnels are in the pyramids,
Yeah.
that can't figure out a purposeful, but they're cut perfectly,
Yeah.
go nowhere, do nothing, tunnels in the pyramids. We could not cut a
600
tunnel straight across 700 feet.
Yeah, 600 feet of tunnel length at exactly 26 degrees, which is half the angle of the sides of the Great Pyramid, just going
Yeah.
straight
No.
like this.
So I'm telling you that the longest span for the waterline tunneling was 700 feet. And the first one they tried, bore through from cofferdam to cofferdam, snaked all over the place. So really what you want to be able to see is when you look in I think the first size casing they pushed through there was 24-inch pipe. But when you looked from one end of the 24-inch pipe in one cofferdam, you couldn't see daylight in the other end. It went all over the place.
All right, so for those that don't know, a cofferdam is basically like, imagine you take a hollow cylinder and you put it down in the water. The top of the cylinder sticks out above the water level. You put the bottom of the cylinder all the way to the ground, and then you pump the water out of the cylinder, and then you basically have a hole in the water.
That's it.
And then you guys went down to and you put the copper, what?
It's a hole in the water.
We went down to a damn hole in the water and we're shoving pipe in the wall, boy.
Actually, you know, in order to get the water line lower than the depth of the intercoastal causeway, which was 25 to 30 feet, the cofferdams, once they put the sheet piling in there, or the cylinder in there, so to speak, they had to excavate 50 feet of dirt.
Yeah.
We were 50 feet below sea level. The bay's like 11 feet deep. The fish were above me.
Yeah.
I needed a 50-foot long fishing rod to get over the top of the cofferdam with 11 foot of string on it.
So a cofferdam is a lot like a boat.
Exactly.
Right, it's a hole in the water that you pour money into.
That's right.
Yeah. So
Ding.
right.
Nailed it.
I thought of that same joke.
It is. It was. It was the stupidest. You know, I told you know, Granddaddy about this job, and he's a old pipeliner from everywhere. And I said, Dad, have you ever heard of anything like this? This is the craziest thing. 4 cofferdams to run 2 36-inch lines parallel. He was like, hell, what the hell are they doing that for? Hell, we can lay a brand new pipe from Texas City right over there down island in a month. I don't know what the hell they're doing. And I gave up trying to describe the rest of it to him after that, because he just, it was defied his logic, and he was dead right about it. So
Yeah.
it was a very strange project.
So basically the idea is they had a water line that also went
2 parallel 36-inch
36
lines
pipes.
that they shoved through 48-inch casing. So,
right, and that was under the water initially, or was it going along the train bridge?
yes, it went under the water.
Okay.
2 lines went under that,
And since it was a channel, they had, which the channel is deeper for the barges to go across, they had to put those below seabed.
correct.
So you had to put the cofferdam down in there, and then the cofferdams had to actually put you below seabed, and then you poked a hole in the wall of the cofferdam, and then
Tried
drilled,
to hit the other cofferdam.
and then tried to drill across to hit the other cofferdam.
So yeah, they started with a directional driller, a big Vermeer, or
But of course,
was
how
it-
wide was the cofferdam?
Pardon me?
How wide? What was the
42.
diameter?
42 feet diameter, 50 feet deep.
So that was the longest section of pipe you could put. You had to.
Yeah, 30 feet.
Yeah,
You didn't
30
have
footage.
room.
Yeah,
Because they weren't in the exact, and they had to be parallel, so now you're encroaching on the edge of the
curved
circle.
edges, yeah.
yeah.
So a 30-foot joint of pipe was the biggest piece they could lower down in there. And they set it in a tray, and then we fitted up to the last piece that we shoved in there or pulled in there, depending on what method they were using that day.
yeah.
And then made that weld, and then shoved and pulled that 30 feet in there with a couple of feet sticking out, brought the next joint down.
But that was after the
and then
cake.
moved over
And did it
10
to
feet
the other
and
side.
ran another parallel line. Well, I want to tell you, I crawled through that 700 feet of pipe from one side to the other.
Oh my.
And, you know, if anything goes
As a
wrong,
welding inspector, yeah.
anything goes wrong, you know, you're just a
Yeah.
turd in a punch bowl.
Yeah. If the cofferdam failed and
Yes.
you were in there.
You're going to be shoved out.
The other
Shoved
side.
out, well, at least you'd be shoved out the other side.
Yeah.
That's
You're
great
going to
news.
hit head first on the steel cofferdam on the other side. You won't make it.
yeah.
But my two bosses, funny story, they were both claustrophobic as heck. That pipe was all stacked on the ground in the yard in Galveston, and they brought it over on barges. Of course, everything was barged out there, so they would, each piece of pipe was labeled for where it went in the water line, so they were specific. But my bosses couldn't even look down the inside of that pipe while it was on the ground in broad daylight without breaking into a sweat. So needless to say, they didn't want to get down in that cofferdam with me, and I made them come down in there with me one day, and one of them really was, all he did was bend over and look in that hole, and I thought he turned ghostly pale, started sweating. I thought he was going to puke right there, but he didn't. But they were horribly claustrophobic.
Man, that's a nightmare for someone.
Yeah, you're like, wait, you got us a job running a hole underground in cofferdams, and we're claustrophobic. Great idea, buddy.
Clausterdams.
Yeah.
No, well, they were the bridge engineers. They were also my bosses. They could walk that bridge high over the bay without, walk that steel, no problem.
Yeah.
So,
wide open space.
Wide open. Yeah.
Until they got over a cofferdam. Right. And then they start sweating.
But yeah, I got down in that pipe, and I had to check a bunch of stuff from one end to the other. And of course there were two 700-foot runs, so I had to do twice. And Mexicans down in there gave me a skateboard, so that's
that's right.
I got one leg on that skateboard, and I'd start through that pipe, and then after a while, oh man, I'd cramp up in one hamstring, and I'd have to roll off that skateboard, put the other knee on there, and then push a little while that leg, and then I'd cramp up again, roll off that skateboard. It was something. But yeah, they took good care of me in that, so it was good.
So in Turkey, there are massive underground cities in this place called Cappadocia, right? They're dug into the limestone bedrock, and down at the bottom levels of them, number one, there's like rivers of water or underground lakes, but there's also kilometers of square tunnel that go and connect them at the bottom level, hundreds of feet underground, to the next underground city. In Peru, Cuzco is connected to Sacsayhuaman. I've shown you pictures of that. It's connected to that by miles of tunnel. Cuzco is connected to it. Some of the older structures in Cuzco are connected down under the bedrock to Sacsayhuaman through these tunnels that David Hatcher Childress says are wide enough for 4 men to walk side by side, and they're perfectly square and they're totally straight. And those are dug, miles.
Lost art, man. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah, and that's through stuff.
The biggest struggle they had was making these tunnels straight. Pipe was straight.
Yeah.
The casing, 48-inch casing, it wanted to be straight. It couldn't go through a bend, and they could not bore a tunnel in a straight line through there.
Yeah, and that's through like sea bottom sludge.
There were 3 different contractors. They finally ended up with one out of Wisconsin that ran a pyramid scheme. That's what it was called. Basically what it did was it had a cutting head, a 48-inch cutting head, and it dragged the casing with it as it cut.
Oh yeah.
And it had a sensor on it on where it was, and there was a sensor at the other cofferdam as a target, and the operator had to keep that target in the crosshairs as he bored through there. And it had a rotating head, and it cut through that mud and brought it backwards and pumped it up through this great big pyramid on a barge. It caught all the solids because one of the Coast Guard requirements was you couldn't turn the water turbine. You couldn't.
Oh yeah.
And that stuff was the brownest, it wasn't Georgia clay, but it was brown, serious clay.
Yeah.
And so that pyramid screen caught the solids and rinsed and rinsed and rinsed and rinsed.
Oh wow.
And then they loaded the solids onto a barge and took it back to the island and stockpiled it. Because once the project was all over, the cofferdams came out, the pipe was buried, the cofferdams were dismantled, all the sheet piling pulled out of there. I know Brett's going to ask me this question, so let me think about what it's called. There were cathodes welded to the sides of the pipe to prevent galvanic electrolysis going on the pipe because it's in salt water.
Oh, yeah.
So they had these huge lead anodes, and they were welded to the pipe, sacrificial anodes.
Yes,
that's what they're
that's
called.
sacrificial anode. Yeah.
Oh,
So
cool.
that was all had to be put down.
Everybody has sacrificial anodes.
Yeah.
Everybody.
And then the sheet pile's pulled out, and the only way you can tell when you go over that causeway on I-45 to the island now is you'll see 4 platforms with blue pipes sticking out of them. That's the only evidence we were in there. But remember that original water lines were only had to dive through, say, 120 feet under, and we're 700 feet.
Yeah.
Way back here.
Mm-hmm.
So one of those had to stay running the whole project to feed water, fresh water to the island. And then we had to cut one of them, get it running, get it flushed out, and make sure that the island water treatment plant decided that the water was clean enough and everything. I mean, the inside, there's drinking water.
Right, so the inside of that pipe
has to be perfect. So
right.
that was part of my job too, was to I had numerous hats because my bosses were claustrophobic, so I just offered to do all of that stuff, where the testing and make sure the pipe was clean enough for drinking water.
So when you were going through there with a skateboard, you didn't blow your nose on the side of the pipe?
Oh, no, I sure did.
You wrapped towels around your feet and stuff.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
just cleaning it all.
Yeah.
So the Watcher has got us some general specs here.
Yeah.
So comparatively speaking, Manila hemp rope is 1/10 the tensile strength of the average steel cable. And we don't know what the averages are, but basically, so a 2.5-inch cable would be 25-inch thick hemp rope,
More or less.
That's 2.5 inch. So yeah. So basically, we'll say 2 feet, right? Times 64. So you
128 feet of rope.
Yeah,
thick.
that's right.
Just
Right.
thick. You laid them side by side.
and you can't wrap that around the narrow side of a fallback block.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have no idea how they move that stuff. Just looking at what I've seen, I'm totally baffled by it. The tunneling, the moving of the giant megaliths that I see in your photos, just amazing work that totally, from my experience, we can't come close to today. And I think we're pretty badass, but not like that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I'd say too. Words of experience there, folks.
Yep.
Yeah, so the other thing is precision placement. Like, so you were talking about taglines. So if you're picking up a steel, let's just say a steel beam, and you're lifting it up to the 10th floor of a building, right? And then you need to put it in place perfectly. How does all that work? How do you get it exactly where it needs to go?
Well, the tagline is flying in the breeze, but
Until
you
it
still
gets up
have to
there?
have a couple of guys up there,
Yeah.
one at each end of wherever the beam's going.
Right.
And usually, even with the tagline on there, it's helicopter, and it's spinning in the breeze, pretty. So they've got to either catch that tagline, or try to reach up there and stop that thing from spinning as it comes by. This is where
People
these
get knocked
crane
off buildings.
operators are so critical to you because you're up there.
Yeah.
And now you can't even look at where you are in relation to, you're looking up like this and you're on a thing this wide,
Yeah.
and you're going to try to reach for something to keep it from spinning. It's pretty risky. Taglines, they're okay, but if they can't be guided all the way up to the position of connection,
Yeah, you don't.
I'm just-
you don't want to get whipped by that
no,
thing.
Right.
no,
Yeah.
I don't want to be hit by. I don't really
A
like
lot
it.
harder to see than the end of that
Right.
beam.
OSHA makes rules. I bet that thing in Dubai, the tallest building in the world, I bet those guys didn't use taglines on any of that stuff.
Yeah. That's the one that they
Because
let.
they would have to use a 2.5 foot thick hemp rope.
That's the one that they let twist because it.
Yes, I think that's the one.
Yeah. Something about steel buildings wanting to twist.
Everything we go in height, I don't know if it's because of the spinning of the Earth on its axis.
The Earth's flat though.
Oh yeah. They try to twist, so it's a constant struggle to keep the building square with the world.
Right. And that building's so tall that the engineers decided to let it twist, and it does. It twists as it goes up.
I'm pretty sure that one does. Yeah.
Yeah, so
It might be twisting because of the weight on top. Like if you think about the accordion effect,
Corkscrew effect.
it's trying to.
But generally we go lighter as we go up. One of the things we were going to talk about was that crane disaster in Atlanta that I saw.
yeah.
We got 5 minutes.
Okay, I can probably get through it. We were on the typical floors of a 20-story building. I mean, typical floor, after 3 or 4 floors from the ground up, the framing, the slabs, the reinforcing, everything starts to get typical because the bottom floors were what holds up most of the building. So once you hit the typical floors, you can pick up speed. And you know, we're amazing. We can pour a floor a week of a high-rise building.
Wow.
Yep, 1 floor every week, pour concrete. So it was a flying form job, which means they had, once they hit the typical floors, they built tables that they were pre-formed, and they oiled them before each pour. And so once the pour was done, they could lower them down underneath the floor. When the engineer said the concrete cured enough, you could lower it out and shove it out the side of the building between the 2 columns and hook onto it with a crane, pick it up, and set it 2 floors above, with 2 floors of shoring underneath. And so we got to the 10th floor, and the crane had 250 foot of tower in it straight up the side of the building, and then 180 foot of boom and a 30-foot jib. And they were pushing a table out caddy corner to the side the crane was on, across the building, and at an angle to the crane. And when they pushed it out the door, even though they'd picked it up numerous times, something went wrong, and boom broke. And you could hear, it sounded like it sounded like cannon fire. And what was happening was, as the boom twisted under the weight of that table, the bracing struts, the X-bracing you see in those booms, they started popping out of there, the welds breaking, just shooting them everywhere, back to that 2.5-inch steel piece, and they were popping out of there, and the whole table came 10 stories to the ground on the opposite side of the building from the crane, and the crane boom just folded up above us. We were on the 10th floor.
Oof.
When it happened, and one guy was running and tripped, he stuck his foot under the wire mesh and then stepped down on it with the other foot and pancaked onto the top of the slab, and he was the only one to get hurt. Nobody else got hurt.
Wow.
And the table came screaming down to the ground and hit on an angle, and the back end of it laid on the 2nd floor slab, and the headache ball was 1,200 pounds, and it had 4-way spreaders on it, and they cut shards. Those 4-way cables cut shards through this table that shot fiberglass needles out all over the place. Nobody got hurt.
Wow. Holy shit.
And the mechanical guys that were working in the engine room of the building, so to speak, the heating and cooling and water, had just walked under there where that table hit right behind them. It was just that fast.
Oh my God. Wow.
So, yeah, that was quite the sight. So, needless to say, I have some pictures, not of the crane accident itself, but of the crane, the tower, some of the flying forms, the tables, yes, that we picked up.
Yeah, and I'll put those in the show notes.
Okay.
So people can get an idea of what you're talking about. But yeah, like we said on the show with GMA, industrial accidents.
Yeah. Yes.
Serious thing.
Hate it when it happens. Actually, they determined that. First, I don't know how this is just what I heard. Anytime you have a conventional boom with the lattice work in it, not a hydraulic telescoping boom, but a conventional boom, and that tower. They're pinned together in 4 points, right? But then, in order to keep that thing rigid you have pennant lines, huge steel cables again. They hook to the crane at the bottom and go all the way to the head section of the boom. They're called pennant lines. So you got the boom lattice work under here, and then these huge cables holding that head section at the top of the boom all the way back to the crane. They said that when they measured the pennant lines after that accident and got the crane apart, there were 2.5 inches difference in length. And that created enough twist in that boom with all that load over there. And I don't know if it was stretching as we went up by the floor or what was happening to it, but they, as far as I know, that's what they attributed the accident to, was pennant lines not exactly the same length.
Wow. Wow. Better make sure you cut those hempen ropes exactly the same length, you butt flappers.
That's right. All right, we're going to take another quick break, and we will be back for the second half of the show. And we are back. Snake Bros Institute for Advanced Coprolite Studies, where there are no degrees, just certificates of ignorance.
I've got one.
We all have one. Yeah.
Numerous.
Wall full of certificates of ignorance. All right. So let's talk about the UPS job.
All right. Atlanta, Georgia, 1983. UPS decided they wanted a fairly big complex, a really gigantic complex from my perspective. And the basic construction was a giant warehouse tied into the existing little bitty warehouse that they had there. The new giant warehouse had the columns were 93 feet away from each other, so one bar joist was 93 feet long. They brought 6 of them in on a truck with a trailer that wasn't even attached to the truck, except with this 4 inch.
Just got all the axles way back there on the other end of the bar joist. Yeah, I've seen those driving.
They were 5 feet deep, so you picked them up one at a time, set them down on the beams with a connector at each end, X-braced them together and decked them. Once that portion was done of the new massive warehouse, they started pouring concrete around the outside in frames with tractor trailer truck bay doors in each concrete form. There were like 2 doors. The concrete was a foot thick, had a lot of reinforcing in it. It had pea gravel on the outside for finish, so they put they put a mat down of waxed cardboard, and they put the pea gravel down on top of that. Then they
Pour the concrete over that.
Right, with the rebar and the steel.
And then when you stand it up, you see the pea gravel instead of the concrete.
Right, so that was going to be the outside.
Classic 80s construction right there.
Pea gravel.
Pea gravel walls on the outside of the warehouse.
Pea gravel walls on the outside.
That's how they did that. I thought they washed it somehow. The concrete was still wet. How do they do that?
Yeah, so part of the steel on the exterior of the building had to be left off so that they could get these giant doorways right up against the wall, and
So the doors are, what we're talking about here is like, if anybody's been to the back of a Walmart or anything like that, they have these giant cargo bay things where like semi-trailers can back right up to them and then they can just unload directly into the building.
Correct.
Right, so they're those
The
things.
same level as the opening of the back.
Right, they have big bumpers so that the thing can back right up to it, and then the doors open on the inside of the building and they can just pull everything out, and then the truck can pull out and it doesn't have to.
So can imagine that everywhere there was a door on the new UPS warehouse, they poured these things right below it, so that all the crane had to do was be to pick that thing up and stand without swinging or anything, but just slightly boom down a little bit and get it up against the wall where it was welded to the steel structure. So you had to put a few up on one side and then you had to move around the building, put some on the other side because
So they wouldn't pull it over.
couldn't weight it all on this side. But the crane was, if I recall correctly, was a 250-ton Manitowoc crane. We pretty much used them all the time for any of the big jobs. It had a heel section, which is the boom section that attaches to the house itself. That's the part the operator sits in. And maybe 10 feet section of boom, and then the head section, which is the section of crane where the top shivs are that the cables run over. They ran a 6-part line through that, through a big block, and they hooked the block to a spreader beam, and then the spreader beam had pulleys and cables on it, and the wall section, of course, now you're looking at the inside, you can't see the pea gravel. We had these embedded steel clutches in the walls that the engineers specified exactly where they had to be, so that when the wall section was picked up, it would roll and stand right up and be picked up in a perfectly vertical position and then boom down into the towards the building where it was welded to the steel framing that we had put up.
Right.
So
Basically leave it like trying to leave the bottom end on or close to the ground
Right.
the whole time, so that it's just
of
stand
course-
it up, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
And the bottom end had dowels sticking straight up when it was on the ground, so that when the wall stood up, it was pointing to tie into the slab of
Yeah.
the inside of the warehouse.
Yeah.
So it would be tied, the rebar would be tied to the mat inside the warehouse.
And then there'd be something
and it'd be
poured.
welded at the top on the steel structure. So that's how they secured that in place with numerous, either tied to the slab or whatever. But I took pictures. I was up on the building of the first wall section they tried to pick up, and going back to that thing about Newton's law, that wall did not want to come up off the ground, and the tracks were perpendicular to the wall, so the crane could just crawl down and pick up the next section of the wall without turning the tracks. So he had one track facing the building and one track on the off side, and trying to get this one wall section with the 2 doors in it up off the ground, that crane got light on the back side.
Yeah.
The track came up off the ground for a little bit until that thing was moving and started to come up, and then that crane settled back down on the back side. So I don't know what the weight of each wall section was at the time, but it looked like a disaster waiting to happen to me every time he tried to pick one up because it didn't want to move.
Yeah.
So yeah, so all the way around the building they went with this construction, of course, staggering the amount of sections they put on one side according to our badass engineers that knew you couldn't load the whole thing. You need to move around and put some on the other side.
So did you have 2 cranes that you didn't have
No,
to run?
one
Oh
crane.
my God! You had to run that crane all the way.
Oh, not crane, yeah.
All right, everybody, take a break.
Yep, so that's the way it went.
Come back
around that
tomorrow.
building. But, you know, interesting, Atlanta is a lot of pink granite, as you know, Stone Mountain. And so there was this, they had to drill and dynamite this area for this new warehouse to go in to pour the footings, which has since been pointed out to me by a very astute concrete guy that, yeah, we drill out and dig out 50,000 psi rock to pour 3,000 psi concrete.
Yeah.
What did you say?
Yeah.
So yeah,
I don't remember who was telling me. I think it was Archer had pointed out that the rock is irregular, and so engineers can't really
grade it.
Right. Because it could have a weak point in it.
It could
How
have
do you?
a board. Could have everything.
Right.
So yeah, but so
The concrete is.
we were having
normal.
this 200,000 square foot warehouse. We'd all have to get off the job while they blew the dynamite at 2 o'clock every afternoon, trying to keep the project going. And then they'd push all that out of the way, and then they'd start to drilling again, and then they'd put the dynamite in it. Next day they'd blow it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And that went on like that for months.
Wow.
Job in the plant. And that bridge in Galveston, the towers had friction pilings driven down in there. I think they were something like 175 feet long. They drove down in the mud off of that causeway somewhere here. But yes,
What do you have there in your formerly nicotine-stained fingers?
Yeah, all right there.
He's got all the bridge specs.
The substructure for the bridge, Galveston Causeway Railroad Bridge, reinforced concrete piers, 236 14 by 117 piles driven 175 feet below sea level.
Wow.
235,632 pounds of steel reinforcing under those two towers. 11,225 cubic yards of concrete.
So that's. Yeah. So that's another question I have to ask. Like you were talking about how we dig out the rock to put in the concrete. On a lot of these ancient buildings, like Baalbek, for instance, we've been talking about that a bunch. Like, they've got these enormous blocks in a wall. What do they do to the ground? Beneath that, no one knows, right? No one's taken it apart to look at what they did to the ground, but obviously they had to do some serious freaking work. Who knows how far down the blocks go? I mean, like, the stone of the pregnant woman was found just recently to have two even more massive blocks beneath, and that's in the quarry. So if you have over there at the building where they've got these things stacked up on top of each other, these enormous blocks, and then all these other ones, like, what did they do to pour? You've got to have
They're not leaning.
Right.
After thousands of years.
The compaction, how come it hasn't sunk into the desert or whatever it is?
Right. So
how did you compact all that? What did you put it on?
Right.
You can't grade it. I don't know.
So at Sacsayhuama, the blocks of that wall, those enormous blocks, so the bottommost blocks are socketed into the bedrock. Each block has a custom-made socket. So I can only assume that they must have done the same thing at Baalbek. You have to dig all the way down to the bedrock, flatten it out like they did at the pyramid. They sheared that entire plateau flat, right?
And they made a sockle.
Yeah.
How did they shear that plateau flat?
Yeah, to within a quarter
What's
inch.
that belt sander look like?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, it's miles across and it's flat to within a quarter inch in any direction
Yes.
you care to measure.
Yes, that's amazing.
So when they do these pads for these big high-rise buildings, what are the tolerances before they pour, or I guess when they're making the pad that's going to be where the substructure of the building is? What are the tolerances? Like
Usually,
levelness?
like it depends on, of course, on the substrate. So down there at South Padre Island, they started up with that 30-story building right on the beach.
No, yeah.
So they have
leaning
to
tower.
drive pilings. The pilings are slightly tapered. They're concrete.
Yeah, so that they resist
They
sinking.
get friction. They're called friction pilings. So the more you pound them down in there, the friction. And so the engineer says that when it takes this many hammers of the pile driver to drive it 1 inch, you're good. So you keep driving them down in there, and if that one goes out of sight, you got to put another one next to it. and keep driving them in there. But basically, it's floating. It's still sand. I don't,
Yeah.
You pour the slab on top of it. You tie all the pilings to the slab. You tie them all together, but it's still floating, right?
Yeah.
It's not. There's nothing.
It's like a bunch of little needles
Yeah.
just sticking down in the ground and
Yeah.
create
And
enough
you-
friction to where all right, they're not gonna, based on the weight of the building, they won't
So
move.
they
Yeah.
put that building all the way up, and you drive
Started.
10 miles down the beach and look back at it, and you go, that doesn't look right.
Yeah.
30 stories. And then you'd look at it from another direction, that doesn't look right. And you could actually see with the naked eye that the thing was out of plumb.
Yeah.
And you're trying to sell condos in there, and once the word gets out that your building's out of plumb,
Yeah.
who's to blame? I mean, it'll be in court long after word of who's to blame, but they dynamited it and dropped it.
Oh, really? It was fun to look at.
It's gone.
Leaning Tower.
The Leaning Tower of Padre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know, for the different whatever,
I was
how
just
the
thinking of-
engineers grade this stuff.
Okay, I was just thinking of like a typical, and maybe they're not typical, like you just
That's
figured
it.
out. But
You have to have a
if
soil.
you're gonna get a pad, like say before you pour concrete or whatever, do they go within a 1/4 inch tolerance across the whole base of the building? I mean, what are the tolerances for that?
You try, you strive for. That's why you have civil engineers on the job. They shoot the top of the forms all the way around. They want an 1/8 inch
Yeah.
in concrete.
But
They don't
not,
want a 1/4 inch.
not in
Quarter-
miles square. Right?
If you're going up 30 stories, a 1/4 inch,
It's gonna be too much.
if you have 15 feet of floor times 30 floors, and you're a 1/4 inch out of
Yeah, how
level on
far
the
is the
slab,
top of
how
that
far are you
building
building
gonna
out
be?
at the
Yeah.
top?
Yeah,
So
but
no,
show me anything those civil engineers did that it's miles square and is still within 1/4 inch tolerance after thousands of years.
Yeah, that's great.
Heavy erosion and all that
They
stuff.
died of heart attacks.
Yeah.
Because that pharaoh was going to do something if it was just right.
Harder to tell if a pyramid isn't straight too.
That's why we say those who ruled the ancient world were rulers.
That's right.
They measured things.
everything.
God, well, how did we screw that up?
But the other, they had some simple tricks. 3, 4, 5 right triangle. They knew that, obviously.
Yeah.
Any multiple of 3, 4, 5, you're going to get a nice right angle at the corner. So they obviously knew some tricks.
Knew the geometry.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And I mean pi is in there and all kinds of other
Of
stuff
course,
too.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's this, so you've looked at thousands of blueprint plans for buildings. Like, would you say that the speed of light is encoded in many buildings? Because this is one of the arguments that they make. Oh, I'm sure you could take any structure and you can mess around with the numbers and find these numbers all in there. Like, you think you can find the speed of light built in, or the amount of distance that a point on the Earth's equator goes in 1 second?
Due to rotation.
Due to rotation in any building on Earth.
Any set of plans I ever. Part of the process of looking at thousands of sets of blueprints is you start to go, those numbers don't look like they add up. And you add them up, and sure enough, they're wrong. And you take it back to the engineer and go, this isn't going to work this
Yeah.
way. These numbers are wrong. Or you have an opening in the side of the building that's exactly in the column
Right.
that's holding the thing up.
Yeah.
I think you need to move that 12 inches one way or the other,
Yeah.
sir.
Hey, see that wall right there? Yeah. All right, now flip the page. You see that toilet drain right there? They're in the same place, asshole.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. You can't,
You have a door opening where I have a load-bearing column.
yeah.
It's not going to work.
Up until the super collider, there was a saying called 2 objects cannot occupy the same space at the same time. I guess they can now, but not in most blueprints.
And only for very short periods of time. All right.
Yeah, look, either the toilet drain or the wall is going to decay extremely fast
Yeah.
once this goes up, right?
That's right.
Yes. Oh, one other thing. I was on as a welding inspector in Shreveport for 9 months, and I had experience in the Houston refineries for years and saw some amazing lifts in there too. In Shreveport, I actually worked in one of the giant complexes that built pressure vessels back when we were putting new refineries together on a regular basis. And this place was 12 acres under the roof, so just imagine a roof over your entire piece of property. And machinery that you just can't imagine, just abandoned in the dark there, collecting dust and leaking hydraulic. One of them had a 5-inch thick steel plate in it that was being rolled in a radius, and it was still in the machine, sticking halfway out of it in the roll.
Oh my God.
And
5 inches
So he's
thick?
basically saying this 5-inch thick piece of plate was being bent by this machine.
Right. We had machinery that could heat it and bend it and weld it, so that whatever you did in the refinery, and then I believe what they did was they put these monstrous vessels on railroad cars.
Yeah, because
And
the train tracks went right through the building, right?
Right, they went right through the building. We loaded our stuff on cars. We were doing blast and ballistic resistant modules for our troops overseas and our refineries. But what was going on there in the 60s and 70s had to be some incredible stuff.
Yeah.
So I think what they did was loaded the finished vessel out the back door on the railroad car. So they have overhead cranes in the building that can pick this stuff up and put it on a railroad car. It's being fabricated horizontally and then picked up and put on a rail car. Then the rail, I believe, went out to some tributary of the Mississippi, and down the river it went and came out into the Gulf of Mexico and back up into Houston through the.
Wow.
Freaking awesome.
And then we picked them up in the refineries. They would get them off the barges in the Houston ship channel and load them back on rail cars, and then they brought them out to the refineries. And anytime you pick up something like that, they use 2 cranes. One was on the heel section and one on the head section. And as you both pick the vessel up, and then the one crane raises it up, and this guy lets the bottom end
So that it's
swing
hanging
around.
vertically.
Yeah.
Then you swing over here and set it on the anchor bolts that are pre-poured in that slab. And they better be right, because you cannot cut those vessels. You can't put a torch to them. They're engineered to withstand incredible pressures. And so I did get to see a lot of that too. Fortunately, there were no disasters on any of those jobs, but I saw some crazy stuff up there in Shreveport that we used to do.
I remember hearing a story about that where there was all the welders, the welding going on, and then there was the big tank of CO2 gas for the MIG welding, TIG welding, whatever. And underneath that tank was all these like massive weeds growing under the roof. Right? There's no sunlight, and by this CO2 tank, there's just these huge weeds growing up.
Big tomato plants. I mean, there was dandelions that looked like sunflowers. I mean, it was crazy, but yes.
So basically, the light from the arc welding is providing the UV, and the CO2 gas is probably, whenever they're filling tanks and stuff, you're leaking out.
The truck backed up there every day to fill those tanks.
So they're getting tons of CO2 and welding light, and they're just like monstrous weeds.
So there were 3 or 4 welders at every station along the length of a 12-acre side of the building. 100+ welders, and they're all, every time they squeeze the trigger to strike an arc, the purging, shielding gas is CO2.
Oh yeah, so
there's tons of it, just tons every day.
The plants love it.
The plants loved it. So yeah.
All right.
That's awesome.
You got tower questions?
Yeah. Well, we're almost. You want to do it right now, or just take a break?
Well, yeah, we can take a break first. So, again, going back to the ancient stuff. So we talked to GMA about precision, but you've done all the with the experience with heavy loads. Now, what do you think about the polygonal stuff, where it's like every block is a different shape? Like, so when we do construction and with these pictures we're going to post, you can see everything is very regular, everything is prefab, everything's the same length, the same width, right? And then these people are putting together these things with this same kind of weights. We're talking about multi-tons, hundreds of ton weights, and then each one is a totally different shape than the other one.
I looked at those pictures today, knowing we were going to be talking about this megalithic construction.
Stand down or die.
And that geometry, that crazy quilt geometry they used, I have no idea what the purpose, why they did it. The tolerances were just incredibly close. I saw the picture of the guy's hand right next to one of those seams. It makes, it's an amazing thing. Obviously, the sockets in those blocks, I agree that there was machinery there. That's the only explanation I can think of for those things. That they were some sort of stabilizer for something that was sitting on top of them that had some other purpose. I guess they took that stuff with them. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I have no idea how they stacked those blocks with that sort of precision, with those irregular cuts on a sloped foundation going up at some grade like that, and be that beautifully done.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine what those blueprints were. Not that block. No. Damn dummy. Get that other one over there. No, your other left. Your other left.
You're fired. Take your butt flap off and get out of here.
Yeah, leave that butt flap here. And if you fall off that thing, your time stops when you hit the ground.
So in Japan, they have we've talked about these before, but all the royal or the imperial palace stuff are on these platforms that are they're megalithic, right? So the Japanese build with paper and wood because they live on a volcanic, or not a volcanic, but it's volcanic. They got Mount Fuji. They've got like earthquakes all the time, right? So you build out of paper and wood, so if the building falls on you, it doesn't hurt much. And yet the imperial palace
can flex.
Yeah. But the imperial palaces are sitting on these megalithic, and they're coming out of water, right? So not only are you building megalithic stuff, but they just come right up out of the canals.
So in all the disasters Japan's had,
those things are still there.
no change.
Yeah.
Yeah, the foundations.
The foundations have been there.
They come out at this. They've got this very complex curve on the corners.
They do this.
They start out at this gradual curve, and then it gets more vertical, but then it's like asymptotic. It doesn't ever straighten out.
Yeah. And then
some sort of parabolic curve.
Right. And then the palaces are built on top of those. So you look at these incredibly complex megalithic structures, and then on top is this paper and wood, beautiful palace construction. I'm sure there's not just paper and wood in there, but the palace is on top of that. But this giant platform that has got this thing where you can imagine that earthquakes, it'll just wobble, but it won't go anywhere. The corners are built with what are called ashlars, the big square giant brick-looking blocks, and then the ones
they're tilted in towards the.
Yeah, they're all tilted inwards, and then the walls of these things are built with the polygonal, all different shapes and sizes all along the walls. So the corners have the big square blocks that are tilted inwards, and they have different tilts as they go up. So close to the top, they flatten out, but at the bottom, they're tilted. I've got pictures of a guy standing next to one that's close to the ground, and it's tilted at like 45 degrees, right? And then as it goes up, they slowly become flat, right? And a lot of them, like I said, come right out of the canals. Like, what's in them? Like, what did they fill those with? How did you hold it up while you're constructing it? Like, it's just like there are so many questions. Like, no one knows how they're constructed.
Got me. I wasn't on that job.
So, I want to know about the pyramid crane.
The pyramid crane.
Yeah.
Okay,
Here, Brett's posted a picture of it. See the ashlars at the corners? They come right up out of the canal. Yeah, here, you can see it over here. Bigger picture on this computer. See the big square blocks on the side. And this is enormous, like, a person would be the size of one block, basically.
You can see the trees in there.
Yeah. And they just come right up out of the canals. And I mean, what would you... And there's tons of this stuff. All the Imperial stuff are built on top of it. They call it the Imperial Gardens, or the palaces are up there. But basically, to be the emperor in Japan, you had to hold these platforms. If you commanded the platforms, you were the emperor. So the big fights where one clan would try to overthrow the other clan, the purpose was to take the platforms, and then you were the emperor.
Well, let the record show that the old-time construction worker is sitting here with his mouth hanging open and is speechless because I have no idea what was going on there. Amazing construction.
Yeah.
Would have loved. What we used to say was, would have loved to have been on that job.
Right.
All right. With that, we will take our last break. The opinions of the hosts on this program are rooted in a relentless and unstoppable pursuit of pyramids and how to build them. Brothers of the Serpent Podcast, and we're back with this final segment with the Stash, our resident expert on building things. And I wanted to... We were doing some calculations before the beginning of the show with Watcher, prompted by the Stash here. It was a brilliant idea. So I want you to talk about the pyramid crane.
Well, your podcast about the size of the Great Pyramid and the type of construction, how tall it is, made me wonder, if you can't build ramps up and down all four sides and you don't have that many slaves, what would the crane look like that was put together to set rock on that job? And it was, I have been on jobs where I felt like a butt flap guy because the job was in sand in Florida, and we had to get rolls of wire mesh that were dumped off by a truck in the parking lot.
Oh, man.
And we had to pick up those rolls of wire mesh and trudge through the sand with them. It was a two-man thing, and shove a 2x4 through the hole and pick that roll up, and you just put it on your shoulder and try to walk through the sand with that 2x4 digging in your shoulder and the roll just swinging back and forth. And since listening to y'all talk about the struggles of the butt flat guys, it brought back my own butt flat days. And it was quite a struggle. So let's say the butt flappers get the rocks to the 14-acre base, and now something has to pick them up and start to stack them perfectly around the perimeter, and then fill in. Let's say they box in and fill in. The structural steel. Build a box, fill in. Build a box, fill in.
Yeah.
Build a box. What would the crane look like that was picking up those blocks? And so, the calculation was basically the distance from the edge of the outside of the wall to the center, because I got to set that top block someday with that crane, and then the height of the pyramid, plus I got to have a cable and a headache ball and some rigging to go around it, the top block to set it on there. And the calculations just on the wall length up the side of that 52-degree angle was something like 612 feet of hypotenuse in that triangle, from the center down and from the center out to the edge. So the crane can't be right against the wall. It's got to be away from the building a little bit. You never touch the bottom cord of the boom, which is the underside of the lattice work, to anything, because now you're asking for it to buckle.
Yeah.
So it has to be away from the building when you pick up the load. And with the rigging and everything, that makes the boom length.
And also, you have to rotate around. Or you'd have to pick up the block and then rotate. So
swing around. We have to swing.
Yeah.
Yes, you can't just.
It can't be close to the base.
No,
of that
it
building.
can't be just tied off and picking up and down, because the guy with the rock, the butt flap guy, put the rock over here.
Yeah.
And it needs to go up there. So I gotta swing around there, pick that block up, and swing over here, and slowly boom down to get it right in the center of that building. Even if I'm nowhere near the top, it still has to go to the center of a 14-acre base.
Yeah. And you're not been driving the crane up on
And you're not going to keep adding length to the crane. You're going to put the whole thing together all at once to be able to top out the building without stopping to lay the boom down and put more section in there.
Yeah.
That makes the crane boom roughly 650 feet long. I have seen some big cranes, but nothing, not close to that boom length.
Yeah.
And what kind of counterweights it would take to be able to boom that much boom down any, a
Yeah,
crane.
half of 755
Okay,
feet, which
so
is
like say you need a 50-ton crane. 50-ton means you got no boom in it, just the heel and the head section. The boom straight up and down, it can pick up 50 tons right there in front of you. Once you start booming down, that goes way off. Now you're cutting down your capacity to lift.
Right.
Every time you boom down, every time you add boom length. So a boom of 650 feet long would have to have impossible blocks stacked on the back of it to keep just from turning over with the boom length, let alone boom down at 52 degrees. I mean, that was the exercise, to try to figure out what the crane would look like that was on that job.
Right. So half of the like one
The watcher says the longest boom in the world is currently 328 feet, less than half.
Yeah.
Oh no, that's half.
Yeah.
It's a little more than half.
And it's a hydraulic. It's all telescoped down into one big trapezoidal section.
Yeah.
And it shoots another trapezoidal section out, and it shoots another one out.
Yeah, what weight could it lift?
Once at 320 feet, probably not a whole lot. It might be surprising because of Germans, of course, but I don't think the Germans were in Egypt putting together cranes back then.
So what? Yeah, and you'd like perhaps if it was a particularly heavy stone, you can tilt that boom up really close to vertical and pick it up right next to the tracks, right, of the crane.
Correct.
Or if it has rigging or whatever, outriggers, pick it up next to the outriggers. But then you have to lift the load way up to the top, the very tip of the boom, and then you have to boom down, moving that load out away from the base of the crane, half of the width of the pyramid,
The base of the pyramid.
which I can't remember what that measurement was, but
300.
Yeah, it was 755 feet in width on one side, so half of that.
378
378 feet away from the
450 feet high, 370 feet, and that gives you a hypotenuse of 612 feet, and that's where we got the 650 feet of boom
Right.
length, just
Yeah.
to move the crane away from the pyramid a little bit.
Yeah.
right. You're holding that load almost 400 feet away from where the crane's sitting.
Right. So the two determining factors are boom length and boom angle.
So
Every time you boom down or you add boom length, the less you can pick up.
I just thought
There's this big chart inside the cab,
Oh
and
yeah.
it's telling you.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I gotta move this thing. How far away from the crane?
And the crane operator's yelling at you like, how much does that thing weigh? And so you got to be able to tell them
Oh,
how
so
much
they had
it
to have a
weighs.
scale.
Yes, it's the
Yeah.
crane has an engineered scale inside the cab.
Show me the scale shirts.
Yeah, scale
Show
sheet.
me the scale shirts.
Yeah.
So I just thought of this, but near those pyramids, actually really close to them in some cases, are these enormous sockets cut into the enormous sockets cut into the ground, which they found. Okay, standard model says that they were tombs of ships. Okay, they're solar boats.
Solar boats.
So they found these enormous wooden boats put down in those things, and I think there are 4 of them. But if you think of like the idea of intrusive people, or like later on the dynastic Egyptians came along, found these structures and the associated sockets, sans machinery, and put the boats in there themselves, their own boats, right? Because they're wooden ships.
Yeah,
I mean,
this
they're
is how they move. The boat in the hole, right? It was like a...
Yeah, but if you think those sockets could have been where they were holding some kind of fixed
Anchor.
structure or
Right.
anchor to, because they're humongous and they're dug into the bedrock.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're like, I think they're like 70 feet long or something like that.
They have some of the boats in a covered area of the museum, and you can actually go down in one of the sockets and see. I think Tom has pictures of those, the boats.
That
The
makes
boats were
sense.
giant, slave paddle or whatever.
Oh, right.
But the holes that they're put in are big enough to where you can imagine you anchor some enormous lifting mechanism that could and if they're on all 4 sides of the
all
pyramids,
4
it's like
Oh, maybe you build a giant thing over
rigging
top
over
of
the
whole-
entire deal. Yeah.
Kind of like one of those container ship operators.
Right, yeah.
Just-
Now, that was what I was talking about before in that episode. The biggest crane that I looked up was a crane that was built on site. It has 2 towers.
Right.
Or 4 towers, and the thing can move like a CNC machine in
Yeah,
two,
right.
on the X or X and Y axis.
Right.
Move that, but it's, you build the crane right there. You can
That's
pick
it.
up loads inside that square.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And put them down anywhere
Now
else
we
inside
got
the
the
square.
rocks from outside here in the laydown
Oh
yard.
yeah. How do you? So it had to
I'm
be.
back to the boom guy
So
because
the
I got
base-
to be able to swing over there and get a rock.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's why they leveled all that structure, because they built a huge crane.
Yes,
That,
and
that
it
can
better
build
be
multiple
on
pyramids.
It better be on dead level ground for
Yeah.
sure.
That's great.
Interesting, yeah. But let's see, you just reminded me of something when you brought that up, Russ, about the machinery. Go ahead.
Here,
I forgot.
have a beer.
Oh,
It's the last segment.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Final segment when you crack a beer.
Get that thing open. All right.
Yeah, I was just thinking of that when you were talking about all this. I was like, oh wait, they have these deep sockets in the rock.
yeah. Oh, I know what it was. On the back of those cranes, okay, so in Galveston, they put the cranes on barges in the bay and anchored the barges. And then they put these cranes together. They're called ringers. They have a big gear, gigantic swing radius ring, steel ring that the crane can swing on.
Oh yeah.
On the backs of these cranes, because they're having to reach over to the Causeway Railroad Bridge to set those tower structural steel, they had stacked concrete slabs on the back of the cranes as counterweights. I got pictures of them.
Oh yeah.
Some of them are marked 32,500 pounds. One concrete one.
Yeah, there's a picture and there's like 8 of these things stacked on top, and one's marked 32,000, next one's marked 40,000.
You know, maybe that was the cumulative when they added up that high.
Yeah,
That
They
might have
kept
been
making
what
the
that
mark
up-
of what the
yeah,
total
what
weight
the
was.
total counterweight was. But
Yeah.
so every crane you got, you better have a counterweight, or you better have it anchored somewhere.
Right.
Because it's going over under its own weight. You can't. So that's.
Either use counterweights or
Yes.
use the earth as a
So I'm
counterweight.
just telling you that when you're on water and you're trying to build anything like on the edge of the country of Japan, and you have a crane out there that's setting stuff in the water, or whatever.
Yeah.
I just can't even imagine what the counterweights are to keep a machine stable. Don't know what. Can't picture it. I mean, these were ringers. They could pick up a lot, but they couldn't boom down very far. And everything that was massive, like those giant reels that went on top, and counterweight boxes that went down through the middle of the towers, and then the truss that sat on top of the tower after the counterweights were down in there.
That'd be practically right on top of it.
Crazy
Yeah.
lifts,
Yeah.
crazy, dangerous lifts. All had to be known before you start the project, that you could get a crane this close and pick this stuff up.
That's the other problem that I have with the dudes with butt flaps and ropes and ramps hypothesis, is that hypothesis assumes no planning.
Yeah, no engineering.
No engineering.
Yeah.
Or very little.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to assume that they could do all the math to engineer the very first bricks they laid down for the ramp to withstand the weights they knew they were going to lift once the ramp was complete at the very tip of the pyramid, why would they build ramps if they were that badass at engineering?
Yeah. That's
it
a
doesn't
good
make
point.
any sense.
That's correct. That's a good point.
Yeah. And if you look at the Great Pyramid, if you pay close attention to if you get a good picture where you can see the each successive layer of stone, you notice that they're in prime numbers. They start out say for example, the first layer, the one on the ground, the blocks are enormous, twice as tall as a person. And then you go up 17 layers and they get smaller and smaller, and then once you get up to 17 and you get to 18, bam, they're big again.
Prime number.
I don't
17
get that.
layers.
Yeah.
I don't understand that.
I don't know
we
either.
Did typical floors.
Right. Typical
once you
floors, but like not only is each individual block on a successive layer different in width, right? Some of them are narrow. They're all the same height, right? On each layer, they're all the same height. But as you go up layers, the height gets shorter and shorter and shorter, even though the widths are different and everything like that. And then you get up to 17, and the 18th layer is enormous again, and then they go.
Wow.
It's crazy. Some kind of
So,
resonance.
yeah, they had engineers. Come on.
Yeah, they were definitely engineering the thing. I mean, once you understand the structure that they had to build to get the quote unquote air shafts coming out of the different chambers, that requires an entirely the way that they're built, where you've got one flat block and then they put another. They cut a trough in the block on top, turned it over, and laid it down so that you have this 8-inch square shaft, and then they tilted the whole thing at 45 degrees and then had them going out, and that entire arrangement is going up through all the layers
And they had each one successively interlocking with the next stages of
so that
blocks
they wouldn't all
weren't
slide down
sliding
into the chambers.
It's crazy. You can't do this without ridiculously awesome engineering, and if you had ridiculously awesome engineering, you would have ridiculously awesome butt flaps.
And
Yeah.
ridiculously awesome.
Incredibly
machinery,
advanced butt flaps,
cranes.
yeah.
650-foot boom.
Yeah.
Piece of cake.
Piece of cake.
Across the Mississippi, piece of cake.
There are pictures of where the King's Chamber shafts come out because they go all the way to the exterior of the pyramid. So you have to climb up like 2/3 of the pyramid to see where they exit to the outside. And you can see amidst all the layered blocks, there's these blocks that come out that are all at a totally weird angle, and they just end abruptly because there's no sheathing anywhere anymore. But the amount of engineering that would just have to go into that, and then of course the grand gallery and the corbelled ceilings, like holding all that weight of the entire pyramid above it, because that's
And it was obviously done while they were constructing it, not after.
yeah, oh yeah, absolutely, yeah, built in.
Yes,
Yes.
that's what I meant.
And the interior rooms are all granite.
Oh yeah, not even the same stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
All right, so I want to shift gears for the last.
Oh yeah, Brett says it's like the claw game.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Damn it!
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another hole that you pour money into.
That's right.
I mean, where you're trying to get the teddy bear out of it?
Yeah.
Yeah. You put your 50 cents in and
We
Yeah.
should build one of those games that
Builds a pyramid.
inside is all of the last blocks of the pyramid. You're just trying to pick it
You're
up.
trying to
Trying
pick
to
them
pick
up
it
and put it on there and build it.
Bunch of pyramidians laying around in the pyramid in the center.
and guys in butt flaps standing around the bottom watching it put it on.
That's
And,
genius.
You lose points for every block you drop that kills a butt flap.
Okay, so switching gears, I wanted to ask you about the Twin Towers coming down. There's been controversy over, I've just seen online and various conspiracy theories that there was demolition involved and all this kind of stuff. I'm not asking you to debunk that. I just want to get your take on you know, since you put up high rises and stuff, like the impact that those buildings took on, the heat, how did that situation seem to you, like when you think about the fact that they came down?
Well, when I watched, I remember, as everybody else, I remember where I was that day, and I didn't get to see the video on TV till I got home. But what looked to me like was immediate structural damage to a building that was engineered for office space only, not heavy machinery of any kind. Looked like maybe bar joist construction. In other words, once they reached typical floors, which I have no idea what that was, how high off the ground that was, but they started the typical floors with bar joists and decking, and then poured concrete on top of that. And then so each floor above was bar joists with concrete and decking, and you know, some mild reinforcing in that concrete, but not anything major. The bar joists are built with a camber built in. In other words, they're bowed over on the top, so that when the load is put on them, so you deck them, and you pour the concrete on them. It's engineered to flatten out pretty much.
Right.
It has some spring in it. You can feel it.
Yeah.
You should be able to feel it, especially if you're moving air conditioners or whatever around, which I don't know where any of but
The towers had a very hot, like a core.
yes, called a shear wall.
Right, all the elevators and all the water and
All the
everything.
high-rises
And it was
we
like
ever did
incredibly
had shear-
thick, enormous I-beams. that
Shear
held
wall,
the core, and
that's
then
called.
everything was floated off of that on the outsides.
Correct.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah.
Right. So then generally they were near the elevator shafts or some other unusable space.
Yeah.
So obviously the Twin Towers had banks and banks of elevators, so they were, I don't know what the cross-section, the floor plan looking down where those shear walls were, but bar joist construction is not going to take much to bring it down. If you topple the columns, the support for the floor above, and then that floor above brings everything above it down, and it pancakes onto the floor where the impact was of the planes. Now you've got all that weight on a 4-inch slab.
And it goes back to what you were saying, Newton's law. Once you get it moving, it doesn't want to
because
stop.
you watch that video and they're sitting there for quite some time. I don't know if it's seconds or minutes, but there's a lot of stuff going on there. But there's a huge load on a floor that wasn't meant to hold up that load without columns taking care of the load above. Now you've destroyed those columns, so you brought that load down on top of this floor that was never meant to hold that much concrete, that much steel, whatever. It pancakes down to the next one, and once that starts, it's coming down.
Right.
All the way, because you have so much weight that was, and the columns can't stand it. So they buckle. Of course, there's that whole heat factor where you got jet fuel and light gauge structural steel. A bar joist is considered light. You know, I mean, 93 footers at UPS weren't very light steel, but normal 24-inch deep bar joists that would handle ductwork and plumbing and everything like that hanging off it. You've already loaded it with water lines, plumbing lines. All this stuff's hanging off those bar joists, full of water all the way to the top.
Yeah.
So it's meant to handle, you know, you took statics, so now you have a certain amount of live load with how much water is moving through there every time somebody flushes a toilet on 110th floor.
Yeah.
What happens? I don't know how they even engineer that stuff, but you've got drain pipes, you've got water supply pipes, you've got fire water lines, you've got electrical, you've got HVAC.
Yeah.
You've got a ton of stuff running through, and they're all tied to those bar joists between floors.
Man, that just made me think of you bust one of those 4-inch fire lines.
Oh, man.
And it's just jetting out.
You got a lot
And then
more.
you're adding all that weight.
And of
all
course,
that weight.
and on the ground, the pumps kick on. They immediately sense a drop in pressure.
They kick
so they
on.
try to pressurize that line, or there's a fire.
So they're filling the floor with water.
Yeah, and they can't put out a jet fuel fire. It's just
Right.
you need
But the
Ansel.
weight
you
is
need
going to be
try
there.
it. Yeah, but now your weight load is increasing because you're pumping a whole lot more water up
Plus
there.
you have a jet.
But
You have an entire
it
plane
was,
in there.
It was meant to come out little sprayer heads,
Right.
not come out of a 4 or 6 inch line
Yeah.
that's running up the stairwell. Generally, those water lines, when you walk upstairs in any kind of motel or whatever, you'll see that fire water line going up a stairwell.
Yeah. I know all the utilities went up inside the core.
Yeah, so it probably
Okay.
didn't do that.
Right.
But still, once you get that jet fuel going and you've now heated the steel to beyond its engineered stress point.
Yeah, isn't it something like once you raise it to 600 degrees, it loses like 80% of its ability to hold stuff?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to melt.
No.
Once you get it hot enough to where it suddenly stops being magnetic.
It loses its tensile strength
Yeah.
and it sags.
Yeah.
Well, you keep burning it, it's going to sag all the way down and sit on the floor below.
Right.
So I don't. My personal thought
So the
on
question
that
that-
was
yeah,
it was light.
Yeah, it was
It
a
was-
catastrophic.
I think the
Collapse.
Empire State Building is beams all the way up, no bar joists. So where you frame in the outside of any 4 columns with beams, you also filled in between those 4 columns with beams too, no bar joists.
Yeah.
So I don't know that type of incident would have the same effect on the Empire State Building. It may be that it would withstand something like that a little bit better, but nothing with bar joists, I don't know, it could withstand that much fuel. I mean, the planes just took off. They were full.
Yeah, and they were transatlantic.
Yeah, so
They had a lot of fuel
That's
in
a
them.
lot of fuel in there, and that's heating. Maybe like you said, it doesn't melt, but it gets cherry red,
Yeah.
and it sags.
Yeah.
And
Well, the thing,
the
so when you-
concrete's got to be exploding,
Yeah.
right? So because it's got water in it.
And like you were saying, that's part of the structural integrity of the bar joists
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah.
Once
So if it ever, so now you're up under the metal deck, and it's light gauge steel. So
Yeah.
say it's 18 gauge metal deck, and you've got that much fuel burning underneath it. It's collapsing. So you've ruined the diaphragm. You've ruined the integrity of one diaphragm of one floor. You got problems.
Yeah.
And of
And
course, the plane, it crashed through columns. So maybe it sheared the wing off, but it did something bad to that column coming through there at 500 mile an hour, or however fast it was going when it
Yeah.
hit it.
Yeah, and so when they actually begin the collapse, the thing that people question, people that are just laymen, and I did this too when I watched the video. I was like, what the hell? So like, the collapse is happening up here, and like 5, 6, 7, or 8 floors down below that, you see these blowouts happening.
out of the windows.
Right. And people are like, well, what? That's what people think look like controlled demolition, that they're going ahead of the collapse.
Okay.
Now, to me, knowing statics and some physics or whatever, I'm like, okay, there's a hell of a lot of shit happening, and there's vents to the outside. I don't know, but that collapse is going to be blowing stuff.
High air pressure.
Yeah, there's air pressure.
Okay, so you got your structure straight up. Let's just look at a box of structural steel with bar joists in the middle all the way up.
Yeah.
Now you take this framing that's got your beautiful windows so your office people can see out. What do you do with that frame? You weld it to the dang beams.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now they're being compressed,
Oh, I see.
and your whole frame blows out.
I see.
As the window frame is compressed, it blows the glass out.
So as the collapse is happening above, the frames below are flexing and it's blowing the windows
that piece
out.
of framing, that window, that exterior framing sticking out of the pile of rubble at the bottom with the firefighters
Yeah.
in it? Kind of long, narrow thing with
Yeah.
lattice work, sort of. I believe those were the window frame.
Yeah.
So like on any high rise we did, once we got the frame up or the concrete poured or whatever, then they came around with the precast, whatever, the decorative stuff, but it was welded to our steel. It could have been beautiful stone like you see in Galleria that had the crane problem in Atlanta.
Yeah.
It could be some sort of metal or glass. The architect, he has these grandiose ideas of what the building's going to look like on the outside. Well, as soon as we got up so high, they started that finish work below us
Yeah.
with all the windows in it all the way around the outside. Well, every bit of that attaches to your frame. All of it.
Right.
Welded. It's welded to you.
So the collapse happening up here is causing things to flex and windows are blowing out below. That's what you're talking about, yeah.
Would be my initial guess.
Yeah.
You had some compression of the exterior facade, and it was blowing. There was probably just as many blowing in as there were blowing out.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's bowing. I'll bet if they put a transit on the edge of that building, it started to do this.
Yeah.
Started to balloon out down below, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe slightly, but glass.
Glass is
Come
going to
on.
explode when you, yeah. Yep.
That would be my initial guess. I don't think there was dynamite charges below the floors that were hit by the planes.
Yeah. There are two mysteries that I've always wondered about in the tower collapse that aren't necessarily part of that. Number one is one of the few people who were very near, and I did a whole bunch of research on this at one point. There was one guy who was just below, I can't remember if he was above or if he was below where the plane impacted the first tower, but he was right there. Okay, and he's one of the few people that managed to make it all the way out before the whole thing collapsed. And he got down to like the 7th floor, and he was some kind of crisis manager, and he was a person who worked for the building, right? And he was pulled. They were going to the stairwell, and he was pulled in by a security guard who had another guy, and this is like 14 or 7 or something like that, way down close to the ground, and the dude was massively injured, looked like some kind of incredible trauma, and like it's never been fully explained like how. Okay, and of course those people didn't make it out, right? This guy got all the way out, and now we have his word, and he was a trusted security person or whatever with the building. He actually, and there's not just his word, there's a phone call. He went and made a phone call from that floor saying, we've got somebody seriously injured here. Okay, so there's more evidence. But anyway, there's evidence there was somebody who had like impact trauma and who was dying and bleeding all over the place.
Like he fell down the stairs.
No, like the guy said he looked like he was in the crash, like, so it was very strange. And he's all the way close to the bottom of the building, right? That was one mystery that I've never been able to figure out. And of course, there's thousands of mysteries like that with this. There's just...
Yeah, what happened to the elevators?
Yeah.
On impact, what happens to the elevators?
Yeah.
They're cable jumps.
Right.
So they're not hydraulic.
Right. Supposedly they were inside the core, so the planes didn't make it through the... Didn't work. They crashed through all the offices and hit the core of the building, and they didn't go any farther. Scattered material all the way around.
You can imagine what was in front of the plane by the time it got to the core, and
right.
What could it have done to some cables?
Right. And the core is like a wall of giant I-beams that are standing up. So, like, supposedly a whole bunch, like the core, like, went like this, right? Everybody in the building felt it
Sway.
Yeah, sway back and forth. But the core kept the plane from going all the way through the building out the other side. And all the elevators
took massive trauma.
It took massive trauma,
And
all
stuff shot out the other side of the building.
yes, around the core. Yeah, the core is here. The plane comes in, and it's way wider, and some of it cut all the way through the other side. But the other mystery is Building 7, which is not one of the towers. Mm-hmm. Building 7 was part of the complex, and it had no reason to collapse, and it did collapse. It was destroyed somehow, and there's no real explanation for that. Those are the two mysteries, and like, I don't understand, disasters happen and the crazy shit happens. Like, there's the same thing is with you've got the same kind of questions with any natural disaster. There are weird things that happen that no one understands. Any earthquake, any tsunami, the hurricane. Think of Katrina. There are people asking, like, did the levees get blown up? No, they exploded because of the pressure or whatever. But you still have these questions back and forth. But Building 7 and the the guy who looks like he was in a plane crash on floor 14 are two of the big mysteries for me on that whole deal. Like, that there was other strange things happening at the same time, which is not that mysterious. There was a giant conspiracy to destroy the buildings. You can imagine that there was other strange things happening at the same time. So
Yeah. Was the building equipped with natural gas, heat,
Yeah.
whatever, you know? And then building 7 is in the same. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of stuff there. I can't answer for sure. I do know what you're talking about, building 7. Though.
yeah.
I have no answer for that.
Yeah. No, I'm not expecting you to have one. I also listened to some phone calls, 911 calls that were recorded of people who were in the building after the impact and were still on the phone with the person when they started to collapse.
Yeah. Well, I know enough.
Not safe for work, folks.
I've never been a big fan of bar joist construction. I've had happen to me and have seen on other projects disasters with bar joists. I just don't like them.
Yeah.
Period. I think it's give me an I-beam any day, a W shape, so many pounds a foot. I'm a happy camper. I do not like bar joist construction whatsoever. It's just too. It's all dependent on the whole thing being put together properly, and any component that gets damaged, you're subject to lose the whole thing. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah.
Don't like it.
Well, one thing's for sure. Those pyramids would have come down if a plane ran into them.
Nope, those pyramids wouldn't have come down.
I think on that note, we should call it a show.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
For joining us there,
Thanks for having
Stash.
me.
We
I
appreciate
sure
it.
enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Hope I learned y'all something.
Yeah.
Every
it was
time we hang
freaking
out.
awesome.
Never fails.
Our list here. All right, you guys can get a hold of us at brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com.
And check out the website. Comment there. Go to the encyclopedia and the glossary.
That's right, and follow us on Twitter. I am slowly getting a hang on this
You're
Twitter
fantastic with Twitter. I gotta admit. I don't do much there.
At Snake Bros, SNKBRS, Snake Bros with no vowels.
And make sure to share the shows.
That's right.
It helps us out.
And donate to us. Even $1 would help us out. Send us straight to pyramids. We will go investigate crazy ancient volcanoes and all kinds of other stuff, dinosaur footprints.
Yep. And thanks to everybody who has donated.
Yes, thank you very much. The first thing we're actually going to do is get some climate change in here.
That's right.
And the last thing for sure, check out History Shift, at History Shift on YouTube and Twitter. This guy has been making the videos of all of our podcasts for me to post on YouTube, and I have been doing that. He is incredibly awesome. It is a ton of work, and he is so cheerful in doing it, and I just thank you so much, bro. You're awesome. So check him out on YouTube and Twitter at History Shift. Thanks, guys, so much. We love you.
Thank you.
Good night, Adamu. Get back to work.